So it is 7:03 and we have a quorum for the meeting of the Board of Health, which we will hold as a virtual meeting. And then Ellen, what do I need to get people to vote on?
All right, they'll say that they're present, whoever is present, and that that will then open the meeting. That you can open the meeting after they do a roll call of who's present, and then you'll review the agenda and add 3 items in blue and vote on it.
Perfect. So Matt, do you want to start us off?
Yep, Matt Beaver's present.
Rebecca Honeywell present.
And Matt Vitale present, and I'll keep an eye out for Daryl when she's able to join us. And so we've got the agenda on the screen, I think. And so we've got 3 items to add as not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance of the meeting, including Kona Isa Framingham Natick temporary food establishment permit, Natick Walpole Visiting Nurse Association May 2022 COVID invoice for approval, and Farm Roads 40B administrative update only. So do I have a motion to add those to the agenda?
So moved.
Ellen, can I second?
Second.
It's preferable that Rebecca second, but if
Perfect.
she doesn't, you can.
Perfect. Rebecca, are you okay to second?
Rebecca, do you want to second the motion to add the agenda items?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time. I'm trying to sign into the computer and we're having some problems, challenges here. I second that. I second that motion to amend it.
Perfect.
Okay, Matt Beaver's aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Perfect. And so our first variance hearing is at 7:30. So why don't we jump into the food permits? Ellen, any issues with the Kona Ice of Framingham and Natick food permit?
No, all 3 of these permits that are listed on tonight's agenda are all food trucks that will be at the Dudley Fest at Unity Farm, and Tom has recommended approval for all of them.
Okay, so that is let me just make sure I'm getting the right one. So the 3, the Thank You Catering, Dente Enterprises, and
Thank you catering.
Oh, thank you. There we go. That makes a whole lot more sense than Thank You. So the Thank You Catering, the Dente Enterprises, and the Kona Ice are all
yes.
Perfect. Do I have a motion to approve those food permits as recommended by the health agent?
So moved.
Second.
Matt Beaver's aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. And I see iPhone, and I'm assuming that's not Daryl, but if it is Daryl, please let us know. And then the COVID, May 2022 COVID invoice for approval. I don't know if I see that in the materials, Ellen.
Yeah,
oh, there we go. Yep, I got it. And so we have 8/25, a total of total service time of 15 hours for May of 2022. Again, for context, this is a period that we're still having a kind of escalated case rate.
Just so you're aware that this is paid entirely by a grant. So it's not costing the town any money.
What's being paid by a grant? Could you clarify? I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
The Natick Walpole V&A invoice that's on the screen.
Oh, fantastic. I'm having a hard time because I'm still on the little tiny iPhone screen, which is like an inch square.
No worries. Do I have a motion to approve the invoice?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Matt Beaver's aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Perfect. And then in terms of the Farm Road 40B administrative update only, my understanding from the select board is that they're going to request an extension of the comment period, which I would support. Given that Daryl's not here to avoid it, I'd suggest we ask Daryl to put together those initial comments for us. Rebecca, I think you went on the site visit as well. So if you have any additional feedback, then we can.
No, I thought that, well, I mean, I have one comment, but
What I would say is I don't
do that.
So I think because we just have this posted as an administrative update, I think we should just identify how the communication will happen as opposed to substantive discussion of the project. So
Sure.
I think that depending on the extension timing, if the extension's past July 6th, we can consider comments at that period. Otherwise, since Daryl's not here to avoid it, I suggest we ask her to put together the comments for the select board as she's done in the past for other 40Bs. Any?
I think that sounds good. She went on the site visit, right? So
she did.
Sense. Okay, perfect.
Perfect. Alan, I don't think I've got anything else to add on that topic. Is there anything that you remember that I'm forgetting?
No, that was pretty much it. That, you know, extension for the comment period. And so it will be on the July 6th agenda then?
What I would say is I think let's put it on tentatively. I think comments may prove to be due before then, but I think our hope is to limit the scope of the July 6th agenda as much as possible, given that it's an extra meeting. And so hopefully sort of Daryl and Rebecca can represent and share those comments, and the more substantive discussion will occur further down the line.
Yes, and I would like to know when I can give feedback now about my presence at that. Should I say it or should I wait till
I think because we just have it posted as an administrative update, I don't think we should talk about concrete facts about the property, but just the next steps in the process.
Not about the property. I just was going to tell you that I could be present at that meeting on the 6th, which I wasn't able to.
Perfect. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear it, Rebecca.
Yeah. Sorry.
No worries. And is that really Michael Lesser? Is it secretly Daryl Beardsley?
It's Daryl.
Welcome, Daryl. We're happy to have you. I've been holding down the fort moderately well, but now I've really got to up it. So I think I can give a brief COVID-19 update. Mark, I don't see, do you expect the 163A Maple Street folks to join us tonight?
I'm not for sure. I'm looking right now. I'm not for sure. Maybe they'll announce it, but I think Deshang Wang, the engineer, wants both plans to be reviewed
when he's here. Okay, sounds good.
Just so you don't, Andrea Kelly is.
Yeah, Andrea Kelly's here.
Perfect. Okay. So why don't I do a quick COVID-19 update? And I think that's just to say we are now in the downward trend. I think that one of the things we know is that the state reported data will become increasingly inaccurate as folks use more and more antigen tests as a higher proportion of total testing, since all of the state reported data is PCR. I think that we see an encouraging downtrend in both case rates, but perhaps more importantly in the MWRA wastewater data that's also downtrending. So I think that, you know, again, we'll continue to see uptrends and downtrends. I think we're seeing a downtrend right now, which is lovely. And I think that I sort of circulated the most recent data that was available from last week with the board and the sort of other constituencies that we've shared with the dashboard overall. I plan to stop sending those updates out since I don't think the state will do anything that captures antigen data, and the PCR data is just increasingly less pertinent. So I think, you know, encouraged by the downtrend, and we can go from there. And I see Rebecca coming in on the computer, so we'll let her in.
Yeah, there'll be feedback for a minute, but once I'm totally in, I'll shut down the phone.
Perfect. Sorry. Sounds good.
Excellent. Okay, good.
And then for the 2022 disposal works installer permit for Robert E. Baker, do we want to go over that in our time before the 7:30?
Yeah, both references did call me back. I had left messages and they both gave very high recommendation.
Okay, excellent. Perfect. So do I have a motion to approve the application for disposal works installer permit for Robert E. Baker, Rebco Inc.?
So moved. Second.
And should there be a note about the condition for pre-construction conferences prior to any installations?
I think that sounds like a lovely note.
Okay, with note, Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Perfect. All right, so we've got the food permit. And then Daryl, can I put you on the spot? I feel like I've got an okay understanding of the public water supply consumer confidence report, but I recall you making a nice introduction to that in the past in terms of giving folks context. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to do that again.
Sure. So the public water supplies are required to produce annual information to send out to all users of the water about the water quality, the source of the water, and any other important information. So I did review both of those and they have been compliant with all water quality standards. And it notes and it highlights, it doesn't include every single test that they run, but it highlights these major ones as you're pointing out right now. Microbial, lead and copper. These are the ones that typically will trigger something to happen if something is violated. Sodium does not, but they may have postings about that for them, just so people know in case they're on sodium restricted diets.
Perfect. And so this is the Leyland Farms, and the sodium is, again, I think the sodium was the only one that was sort of out of range, which I think is common in town.
Yes.
And then let me pull up Woodhaven.
Especially downtown, but not only downtown.
And for folks in those areas, I definitely found it informative. And so if you're interested, understanding more about your water supply, I think it's a nice piece of material, particularly if it's where you live. And then the Woodhaven testing. And I see Tom Trainer's hand up. So Tom Trainer, fire away.
Very, very quick question.
Absolutely.
I'm familiar with these type of reports, but my question is, are they publicly posted somewhere if you're not a resident? I think they're automatically sent to the residents, but of those.
I don't know that they're publicly posted, but we're certainly able to share them.
You can find postings for municipal large-scale systems. You'll find them if you go to a city or town website, and they should have it somewhere on there. I've always been able to find that. Right. But for these smaller water supplies, I'm not sure.
I don't think
posted at the state.
I don't think they are posted.
Yeah, so I don't think really so either.
My question: How can others, including myself, get a copy? I guess my question.
Maybe we should consider posting it on our website or a link.
If you can go to the last page, whoever's moving it, the last page of either one. The second.
And Tom, in the short term, would you want us to send you copies of these?
Right there.
I would love that.
Right. The report is available. It's on the next page, I think. Right there. Yeah, the report
perfect.
Is available from Mass DEP website.
And so if you've got the report, Tom, you can find the report, but if you don't have the report, it's going to stay a secret because the report link is on the report itself. But maybe Ellen, if we can make sure that we post that, are we able to post the links for Woodhaven and Leland in the minutes for the meeting?
Yeah, I can.
I'm willing to say pretty please.
Yeah, okay.
I will email them to you separately. And then Tom, it sounds like you'd love a copy of both reports, which it sounds like we can supply by email.
Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Any other discussion or questions for folks? I feel like we get lots of kind of blanket notifications. And I actually found this one of the more interesting to read, partly just because it gives real specific data about, where do we get our water? How is our water done? It's I think, pretty accessible language for me as like not an environmental engineer or environmentally trained. The material felt pretty accessible and understandable. Perfect. And then for the, okay, we did up to 5. For the June 1st minutes, I didn't have any. I had one suggested change to one word was the extent of my edits for Ellen. Did anybody have any substantive edits, or are we ready to approve?
I did not.
I had likewise minor.
Perfect.
I was not at that meeting.
You missed out. It was the best meeting ever.
I'm sure. It was.
So do I have a motion to approve the June 1st, 2022 minutes?
So moved.
Second.
As amended, correct?
It's correct, as amended. Thanks for keeping me on the straight and narrow, Ellen. Perfect. So we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Daryl Beardsley, aye.
Matt Beavers abstain.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Now I'm just going to sing a song for the next 11 minutes until our first variance hearing. It's not going to be great. I think one comment I would make, Ellen, is I think we can probably remove COVID-19 as a standing agenda update. And can sort of update on an ad hoc basis. I guess under the existing COVID update for this meeting though, last meeting we discussed the availability of free tests. Since we have about 10 minutes, do we want to think about distribution strategies a little bit with this group?
I can say after it was reported in the news that local boards of health were being provided with tests from the state, I've already received calls.
Oh, good.
From people who want them. And I've just responded that we don't have them yet. And that when we do, that I'll be posting something on the main page of the town website. And I just have told them to monitor that website. But I was going to ask, should there be a limit to how many tests I give to a family, or?
I think it can be judgment. If somebody's like, I'd like to get 200 and do you have any priority mailers for eBay? You know, they'd probably say no. But if a family had 6 or 7 family members, you could easily see them wanting 5 or 10 tests. And I think that would be unreasonable.
Okay.
You know, and so I think it can be sort of, does it seem reasonable? And if it doesn't, then I'm happy to connect with you in real time to figure out how we troubleshoot. Because I think the goal is to end up with no tests at the end. And so if people are getting them and using them, I think that's a good outcome. Yeah,
because in addition to the 810 that we will be getting from the state, I also received, I think it was 110 from Region 4AB. So,
good. That's wonderful.
To distribute them as well.
And then the other set of tests, I think we talked about briefly before. We essentially placed a HEMI order with a subset of the ARPA funds back in February. Those tests arrived. The expiration date was 4 weeks after the tests were delivered. And at that time, we were sort of keeping them available in case we needed them for an acute outbreak. I have reached out to the manufacturer as a number of test lots have had extension of their expiration dates. They have not gotten back to me yet, although I can try again this week or next week, just to clarify whether the lots that we have are included in those that have an extension of the test date, or whether we sort of got kind of late dated milk in terms of our initial order. If we're able to extend the expiration date, then I would favor including those in the ones that are able to be distributed, but if the extension date can't be extended, then I think we'll have to dispose of them. So Ellen, I'll keep working on that and we'll keep you posted as I try to connect with the manufacturer.
Okay.
I guess the other question I have is, what do you think works best for distribution? I think certainly the Board of Health office is appealing. Is there a role for getting tests to Woodhaven or Council on Aging or other sites or venues so that, you know, folks who may not come into the Board of Health kind of have ready access, or if there's areas that have different hours than we do, that extends the ability to pick them up?
I'd be willing to contact Claire McLennan who manages Woodhaven to see if she has an idea for a way where we could provide some to Woodhaven.
I think that sounds lovely. And then Ellen, my recollection was that for the preschool, that there's a pathway that they're getting tests from the state that's existing.
Yes, that's correct. And also Council on Aging, I believe gets them directly from the state as well.
And so I think it's,
double check.
are there any other avenues that folks feel like would work well for distribution in terms of having sort of more extended office hours than we do. I just don't have a good sense of how different town hall offices compare, or if there are other avenues that we should think about.
So the other one, but I don't know what I think about it for the summer, given that things are outdoors, would be the Recreation Commission.
Okay.
But since everyone's outdoors, I'm presuming for whatever activities they're doing, that may not be so important.
Okay.
The other one could be if they're still doing the summer go-round program. I'm not sure if that's still taking place at Pine Hill. That has a lot of indoor aspects to it. That could be a good one. Unity Farm was taking over some of that as well. Maybe they.
My sense is, I think the district is quite well supplied at the moment.
Okay.
At least that was my impression last time we met with them. Does that sound right to you, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is wonderful. Like having ample tests is good.
I was going to say the tests from the state, before we distribute any, we have to put stickers on because the expiration date on the boxes are incorrect. They've already been extended. So the state is also providing stickers that have to be put on each box in a certain position.
So my first job as a 14-year-old was putting barcode stickers on library books. So I feel like I'm uniquely qualified. So I'm happy to be a sticker volunteer, Ellen, to help us fix those.
Yeah, and Jean and I, we'll certainly do them too. But I mean, I would just recommend, why don't we see how it goes first? And for all we know, they could go very quickly. We've already gotten calls, so
I think that would be wonderful. I know Dover did a distribution at the transfer station, which sounds like it was well received, but if we can have it more where people come in, as opposed to, we have to find extra volunteers to staff additional time and hours, I'd favor doing that as much as possible.
Yeah.
I guess the other question to check in with is just to see if there are any departments that it would make sense to have a stock on hand. So maybe I will reach out to DPW and to the fire and police departments to just see if they have any outstanding needs that we should account for. Any other thoughts, feedbacks, or suggestions, either from members of the board or members of the community? And then Tom mentioned the library. I think a great suggestion, Tom. Let me, for that one, let me think about it a little bit, but I think I will be happy to reach out to the library leadership team to figure that out. And Ellen, I'll include you on that communication. Awesome. I think that was it in terms of COVID updates. Ellen, do you have any others that come to mind for you, or any other discussion we want to have before we prepare for the 7:30 variance hearing?
No, I think that's good.
Perfect. Okay. And then we will, and for the board, is there any objection to removing this as a standing agenda item and kind of moving it over to an ad hoc as we have more or less activity?
I think that sounds good.
And again, I don't...
Maybe a couple times a month or something, just because I think people appreciate getting updates, and it's nice to hear that it's not active. I mean, it's reassuring.
I mean, we only meet a couple times a month, so.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Yeah, so I'm happy to sort of be responsible for keeping an eye on things, and if we get changes that are significant, we'll certainly escalate that to the board, and then can just plan to periodically include it as an ad hoc topic, just to kind of have it on the radar. And again, I don't say any of it to minimize the importance of COVID or the prudence of attention to it, but just that as we enter a kind of new phase, that the approach that started in the spring of 2020 may be reasonable to kind of evolve as conditions continue to evolve.
I also wonder if there's some way we could have some, even if it's not posted every time, is just to ask people who are in attendance if they have any questions about it. Maybe more as almost a public comment period sort of thing, but I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
The rules of posting.
So we'll, at least in the meantime, we'll sort of pull it off the chair's business slot, and then we'll plan to continue at ad hoc. And I suspect, again, there'll be some discussion as we kind of get into the summer and into the school year and into, fall surges that, again, I don't think this is the last time we'll be talking about COVID by any stretch, but that we sort of are in a shifting landscape for it. All right, so I think it's now approaching 7:30, so I'm going to work on getting the plan up. And I think, Dan, did I see you over here?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. So let me, am I successfully sharing the plan?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. And is it reasonably visible to folks?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So Dan, I think we're now officially 7:30. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dan McIntyre, representing the homeowners of 12 Washington Street.
Excuse me, before Dan starts, I just want to say that I did receive all
perfect.
of the green cards. The notice was made correctly, and it's all set for the variance.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks so much, Ellen.
Okay. So you may recall that at 12 Washington, we replaced the septic system last year. The house was subsequently sold. The new homeowners moved in. They did a lot of renovations on the house, and they noticed that there was a lot of corrosion in the plumbing. So they had that inspected, and the inspector believed the cause was the high sodium. The well test had sodium in the range in the high 300s milligrams per liter. So they had the well inspected by Northeast Water Wells, and the recommendation was that it was not a very good well as far as protection of the water quality. So they thought a new well would be the way to go. So the homeowners contacted us to locate a new well. And as you know, there's a number of setback variances or setbacks for wells. And we tried to do our best on this small lot. And I think we made some improvements. The board granted a variance request to have the well just a little over 70 feet from the septic when we replaced the septic. Now that the homeowners are drilling a new well, we can easily meet the 100 Title V setback, and we got it to be 110 feet off the septic, which we think is a big improvement. We're getting it further from the driveway, but we are going to be closer to the property line and closer to Maple Street. We feel the proximity to Maple Street is not a big issue because the grades tend to flow down toward Maple Street to a wetland and not up onto the property. The well location is a little bit higher than the elevation of Maple Street. So we think overall it's a big improvement over what was there before.
Perfect. Any questions, comments to the board, or Mark, anything else to add?
It looks to me like it's far enough. Oh, was that a distance to driveway? Sorry.
21 feet
Yep.
is how I read it.
Okay.
And if I can, Dan usually will note within his variances the distances, but in this case, there were so many distances, he put it in condensed in the box there. So I thought that was a creative way to show the required versus what's existing, as well as I just only had one question, maybe Dan can answer it. Is the present well a shallow well or is it a deep well?
I'm not 100% sure. I didn't inspect the well, but I recall it being a shallow well.
So this will be a great improvement then by having a drilled well. Thank you, Dan.
It all looks reasonable to me.
My only question is, which is the road right away that's 24 feet? It could be that I'm just not.
To
Is that-
Maple Street.
Maple Street was 24. Oh, for the right of way. The roadway is 45 feet, but the right of way is 24.
Right.
Okay, got it.
And I guess, you know, one question I have, knowing we kind of can't know, but that is a lot of salt. And so certainly replacing the well seems prudent. You know, do we have any concern that that sort of roadway contamination or something else are just unknowable?
I think it's fairly unknowable, although not to always be the bearer of bad news, but they're finding that the particles released from tires are far more significant than they ever realized before. So that'll be another topic for us in the future when they get a handle on that.
Perfect. All right. So I will, if it's okay with folks, I'll pull up the letter. Any other questions about the plan? I should have asked that before I jumped ahead.
No, I have to say, I forgot that this was the plan with the box with the distances, which I also found really helpful. Thank you, Dan.
Any other questions or discussion before we go to the requested variances?
And out of fairness to the engineer, he did note the required distances within the variance request on the letters. So it's all there, both on the plan and within the letter. Perfect.
So first, do I have a motion to allow a variance to section 6.0B to allow a 110-foot setback to the septic as opposed to the 150 feet required? Again, this is an improvement from the existing 77-foot setback to the septic with the existing well.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion?
And I'll just note that this does, I believe, remove the requirement to have a Title V before. Well, most people want a Title V anyway. Yeah. So Mark, what does it change?
Yeah, so they won't.
Given that when you're transferring property, you have to have Title V anyway.
Yeah, so they're going to need to do a Title V if they transfer a property, if they transfer the property after the actual septic construction certification expires, and that's either 2 or 3 years. But if because the well was less than 100 feet, they would have had to test the well.
Yeah.
As part of the Title V.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it was an add-on. All right.
Yeah,
So that requirement.
Yep, exactly.
Got it. Okay. Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion to approve a variance to section 6.0D to allow a 24-foot setback to the road right-of-way as compared to the 50 feet required?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion to approve a variance to section 6.0D to allow a 45-foot setback from traveled road with 55 feet required? I think this relates to the previous variance.
So moved. Oh, sorry. So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. And then for our last one, for section 6.0E, do I have a motion to allow a variance to 6.0E to allow a 12-foot setback to a property line where 25 feet are required? And I just want to pull up the plan just to kind of see. So that's the property line to the sort of, I guess, west is the salient property. And I don't believe we have any abutters here, but if you're an abutter and you have questions, feel free to ask away.
Matt, just so you know, that is a driveway that goes down that side of the abutter's property.
It's
So
sort of
The house is set way back.
Yes.
okay. Perfect. And again, I think this is a fairly constrained property in terms of maintaining that radius around the septic system of 100 feet. You sort of draw that arc and there's not a whole lot to work with. And so this is sort of the spot that maintains the distance from the homeowner's driveway, kind of swings the radius as far out as we can get to, but needed to swing to this point to maintain the distance from the driveway. And as we get further up here, would run into issues with the kind of other roadways. And then I guess what's the cistern connection?
That's the fire department cistern for fire protection buried out in the right of way of Maple Street.
Okay, perfect. So unrelated. All right, let me go back. And so do I have a motion to approve a variance to section 6.0E to allow a 12-foot setback to the property line?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. All right. Ellen, what do I need to do next?
Well, you close the hearing and then you ask Mark if he recommends approval of the plan.
Perfect. And do I need a vote on the hearing closure?
No.
Perfect. So with that, we'll close the variance hearing. And Mark, do you recommend approval of the plan?
I'm recommending approval of the plan, and just so the board knows, it is noted on the plan that the old well needs to be abandoned, but I'm going to recommend approval with the condition that the present well be abandoned as part of this permit.
Sounds good. Dan, any concerns with that on your end?
No, in the notes section of the plan, we have it being abandoned by a licensed well driller.
Perfect.
As required.
That is correct. Yeah.
Sounds good. And then, so we've got about 10 minutes before the 25 Farm Road discussion. Mark,
Matt,
go ahead.
Did the board approve the well permit?
Perfect. You know, it's these little things. I'm so excited. Do I have a motion to approve the well permit with the variances as discussed?
And condition.
And conditional to abandonment of the existing well.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Okay, Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Mark, do we need Deshang here to discuss the lot 163A plans?
He asked to be here, but again, it's up to you. It's up to you. It doesn't matter to me, but I know he said he would ask that he be present for both plans, but I'll leave it up to the board.
I certainly wouldn't want to bypass the wishes of the engineer to be present for the discussion. And so I don't think we have any other business that doesn't either have a specified appointment or required Deshang. Does anybody see any that I'm missing?
You didn't talk about the DEP.
Perfect. Notice. Perfect. And so that I can pull up. That is very helpful. Thanks, Ellen. Where did it go? There we go. And so, Daryl, is it okay if I ask you to introduce this as well?
Okay, yeah, let me.
So I think this was just kind of overall, and oh, perfect. Deshang's timing is on the spot.
Okay.
So let's put this to the back end because I think I saw Miss Kelly here, and if Deshang's able to join us, I'd love to try to get started on that if we can at least get it introduced and opened up before our 7:50.
And Matt, just so you know, I did see the applicant for the owner for 53 Farm Road as well, so they're both here.
Perfect. So why don't we do lot 163A, Maple Street, but for Paul and Andrea Kelly, new septic, new well application. And I see Deshang there, and Ellen, have refreshed my memory. Have we gotten the necessary materials from Concom?
Oh, yes. Otherwise, it wouldn't be on the agenda.
Perfect. So that works out pretty good. And Mark, do I have the right plan up on the screen?
Yes, you do. And this plan went through, I think, 1 or 2 revisions. It is a lot that is surrounded almost by wetlands. So that's why you see the areas designated. Let me open up my plan. I'm having trouble reading the one on the screen, but designated with the No alteration. That red line's 50-foot no alteration zone for the Conservation Commission. So it was quite a long process, I believe, not long, but a very thorough process to get this reviewed by Conservation because of the fact it had the wetlands on two sides at minimum. And so the engineer has now submitted, even for that little circle, that's where the stockpile is. I'm just reading some of the conservation notes. I reviewed this plan and wanted to make sure I highlighted that. The septic system is very long trenches. And the reason they're long trenches is he was trying to avoid the wetlands. And that's where the soil was conducive for new construction. And the distance to the well was what had to be readjusted. The well had to be the right distances to the right of way, as well as the correct distances to the septic system. So the original plan of septic system was a little bit closer to the house. So those two leaching trenches have now moved out a little bit further out so the well could have the appropriate required distance. Outside of that, I'm just opening up the plan. Deisheng is here if he wants to explain, but he did need he met the 150-foot distance to the septic system. It's 50.97 feet to the edge of the property and further from the right of way. And so it's both for a new well, new house, actually. If you can't hear me, it's because I have the plan covering, I'm sorry. And the new septic system.
So no variances.
No variances.
Anything other than it being a complicated piece of land to work within. It seems like there's nothing out of the ordinary for new construction.
No, and again, the owners happen to live to the wetland side, I'll call it, and the abutters septic system is on the opposite side, on the bottom right side. There it is right there. And the appropriate notes were shown to indicate all wells within 200 feet have been shown, or if they exist, or if they don't, that they're not there. So all the appropriate notes have been placed on the plan as it relates to the distances and so forth.
And just one question I had is, and I think this is probably for Deisheng, I see the dug well here. And so can you just walk through what that represents?
It's like in an old private irrigation well. So there's you can see there's like a foundation walls, like a fieldstone retaining wall there. So probably by the time when they do the construction, that area is going to be graded out. So it's probably will be filled with a clean, sand, and then squared it out like a landscaping area.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can, that's a good point, Matt. At the end of the discussion, it should be conditional to the appropriate abandonment. And if it was truly a drinking water well, then a licensed well driller is going to need to abandon that well, and that can be the condition.
Yeah, it's not drilled well. I think it's probably like in 30-inch stone lined well. So
yeah, it still would need a licensed well driller though, Deisheng, to properly certify.
Okay, yeah, sure, I understand.
So might that be a condition of our approval of the plans?
Yes, because you're approving the well and the septic. So when you approve both, you can make that as a condition that the existing old dug well be abandoned by a licensed well driller.
Perfect. And then it looks like I see the 2-foot boulders for the new well that will not satisfy the 20-foot setback. So that's reflected. Perfect. And so Mark, you'll need a motion from us to approve. Any further discussion by the board?
I have nothing further.
Perfect. So do I have a motion to approve the first revision of the plans for lot 2 of 0 Maple Street?
So
conditional to
abandonment of the existing dug well by a licensed well driller.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Perfect. All right, let me go back to, all right.
Ask Mark, is any deed recordings needed?
Yes, I wrote it on the side of the plan. Thank you, Ellen. You caught it. Garbage grinder deed restriction is required.
So should there be another?
Yep,
I would
let's
ask
go.
that the board reconsider the vote to add that.
Perfect. So do I have a motion to approve the revised plans conditional to 1, the appropriate abandonment of the existing dug well by a licensed well driller, and 2, by the garbage grinder deed restriction?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Daryl, I.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. And then it looks like we've got our 750 variance hearing for 25 Farm Road, septic replacement, well replacement with Dan McIntyre. And Ellen, have we gotten all the green cards back?
Yes, we do have. It's all finished. The hearing can be opened.
Perfect. All right. Oh, let me get the plans up.
And just to note that the homeowner is present.
Perfect. So Dan, you're welcome to introduce yourself, and let's see if I can get it back to normal human size. Okay. Is that relatively readable?
I can read it.
All right, perfect.
So again, Dan McIntyre representing the homeowner of Mrs. McDonald, who is on the call. So she is in the process of getting her home ready for a sale. The existing system is a series of cesspools that did not, wouldn't pass the Sherburne requirements and did not pass Title V. What we're proposing here is to put in both a new septic system and a new well. The existing well is a shallow hand dug well that is in close proximity to the cesspools. So we looked at trying to get a good separation on that and get a better well. Yeah, right, that's the well there in the backyard. And the 2 cesspools are in the backyard as well.
Is that here and here?
Yes.
Okay.
So we dug a number of test pits in the backyard as well as well as up in the side yard to look at options of either putting a septic in the front and a well in the back, or a well in the front and a septic in the back. Based on the soil testing, the septic in the back was the preferred location and the well up in the front. That way we got the well upgrading of the septic system and upgrading of the abutting septic systems to either side of this property. For the septic, we're proposing to use the Elgin system. We're not asking for, it's a complete Title V compliant septic system. So we're not asking for any reduction beyond Title V. We are asking for a reduction of the 5-foot offset of the Sherburne requirements down to 4 feet. We wanted, the whole area is kind of shallow ledge in that back area. We had just enough soil to meet Title V, but we felt that we should use the Elgins and keep it up as high as possible to get the best treatment before it hits the ledge and travels to who knows where. So we're proposing an Elgin trench system, a 2-compartment septic tank. We're also doing some plumbing on the inside to connect the wash machine into the system where it goes to a dry well now. And then we're proposing to put the well up in the front yard or the front side yard where we can meet the 100-foot offset to the septic system and maximize offsets to the abutting septic system. We do need a few variances of the Sherburne regulations to make this all work. So we're asking for that. for those variances, which we can go over. But I thought we'd stop now and see if you have any questions.
I have one. It's more a curiosity. So you found soil in between ledge. Is it also above ledge? Is it sort of like a bathtub of soil, or?
Well, I don't think it's a bathtub. I think the ledge tends to be high up around the house. If you went into the basement of the house, you'd see exposed rock up there. We hit very shallow ledge in those test pits on the side of the house. And then it got deeper as we went back. And I think it tends to, follow out into the open space in the back of this lot, where there's a wetland further back. So I don't think it's a bathtub. I think it's just an outcrop up near the house.
Okay. And I appreciate the Elgin to keep the effluent as far away from groundwater as possible.
Any other discussions that are helpful with the plan up? Otherwise, I'm happy to scoot over to the letter. Where am I going? 25 far. All right, so first we've got, do I have a motion for variance to section 8.01, groundwater offset to 5 feet, 4 feet provided per Title 5?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment? Any kind of questions?
Are there any abutters here this evening? Okay.
Yes, I'm in a butter.
Do you have any questions before we go through
I don't.
voting?
I don't. I have no objection.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, then I'll vote, Matt?
Sounds great.
Okay, Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion for a variance to section 8.02, depth to seasonal high groundwater less than 5 feet, which is a natural condition?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Dan, it should be noted, it doesn't have to be, but this is for a replacement septic system for an existing house.
That's correct.
And sure beats a cesspool and a dry well.
Agreed.
All
okay.
right.
So Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion for a variance to section 10.1A, distance of down gradient well to be 125 feet, a distance of 103 feet is provided to new on-site well, abutters well meet regulation?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
I think, I'm just reading that again. I think there might be a typo on that. I think it's an upgradient well.
It does say upgrading on the plan, but yes, yes, I was going to mention that. Thank you.
Perfect. So do I have a motion for a distance to upgradient well to be 125 feet, distance of 103 is provided?
So moved.
Seconded.
And so my only comment is Dan's done his usual stellar job of fitting things into difficult, constrained circumstances.
And a clear improvement from the existing 52 feet and a cesspool. There's no other discussion. Daryl, you want to start us off on the voting?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do we have a motion for a variance to section 10.2, wetland offset to be 125 feet, 121 feet provided with the design meeting Title 5? This looks like driven by the depth of soil issue.
Actually, it's the wetlands as well, and they're located on the plan way in the back. You'll see a distance shown at 121.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, so moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Since this one has Concom approval before getting to us for it. So Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. And do I have a motion for variance to section 10.2 property line offset of 14 feet instead of the Sherburne regulation of 20 feet?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Now we'll move on to the well regulations. And so do I have a motion for a variance? Ellen, do I need to take each of these as their own motion?
Yes.
Sounds good. Happy to do so. So do I have a motion for variance to 6.0A, well to the downgradient septic to be 125 feet, 103 feet provided to the on-site septic?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion for a variance for 6.0A, 115 feet provided to abutting downgradient septic at 27 Farm Road?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion for a variance to section 6.0D, well to road right of way to be 50 feet with 20 feet provided?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further comment or discussion?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion for a variance to section 6.0D, well to road pavement to be 55 feet, 33 feet have been provided?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion or comment?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Do I have a motion to approve a variance to 6.0E, well to property line to be 25 feet, 17 feet are provided?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further comment or discussion?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Perfect. So I think, Alan, it looks to me like I got all the variances. Does it look to you like I got all the variances?
Yes, you did.
Oh, good.
Close the hearing.
Perfect. And so with that, we'll close the hearing. And Mark, are the plans ready for approval?
They're ready for approval, but with some conditions and deed recordings. I'll start with the deed recordings. The deed recordings will both be for the garbage grinder that's not being designed for, and the actual innovative alternative technology being utilized, which is the Elgin A42 trenches. The conditions are that the septic system, well, the well needs to be drilled and the old well abandoned, and potable water is to be determined for quality and quantity prior to the septic system installation.
Perfect. Any other conditions?
Not that I know of.
Perfect. So do I have a motion to approve the plans with deed recording requirement for garbage grinder and I technology and condition to the drilling of the new well, the appropriate abandonment of the old well by a licensed well driller, and demonstration of adequate quality and quantity of water prior to the installation of the septic system?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further comment or discussion?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Perfect. And Ellen, did I get it this time or am I forgetting something still?
You got it.
Woohoo! Perfect. So with that, we'll go back. And Daryl, can I pass the baton back to you regarding the DEP annual notice to local boards of health?
Okay, yes. So I found it quite an interesting and lengthy list of things that boards of health work on and may be responsible for, although I think it was heavily weighted towards towns that have public water supplies. For example, in emergent issues, there's a section on cybersecurity because apparently there's been a number of cyber attacks against public water supplies specifically lately. And I've seen this even at I think the EPA level has been sending out notices as well. There's a section on PFAS and in private wells, so that applies. It's a good reference for us for things that may arise. But again, we don't have things like healthcare facilities that we need to track. For Tom Trainer, if he's still on, they do have a section on cyanobacteria and cyanotoxins with some information about that on limits of what people can be exposed to and some sources of information. So, yes, I think the majority of it is well related, which in a different way than what we need to deal with. For example, we don't prepare emergency response plans for when one of our municipal public water supplies has a problem because we don't have that issue. Let's see what else was interesting. It has some good information for anyone who hasn't had a chance to read it about what are the different levels of public water supplies. And again, we're not the regulators of that though. So I'm not sure how we would directly use this as the Board of Health, but it is interesting information to have. The difference between community, non-community, transient, and then non-community, but transient. So.
Perfect. And I think to kind of Tom's earlier question, if they're interested folks who want a copy of this, I'm sure it can be requested and we'd be happy to provide and share it for those who are interested. I would say that when I talked about how much I enjoyed reading the public water supply informational ones, this was a little bit what I was picturing, where the kind of 26-page report that was like a little bit more technical, I got less from than the site-specific, here's what's happening at Leland. But certainly if folks are interested, happy to share and circulate.
I hope this is not a precursor to local boards of health having more responsibility for PWSs, and they're prepping us. Not that it's not an important function, but there's a lot to it.
Yeah, there's a lot to it.
A few more staff, but.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I think that we don't, let me just go back to the agenda. I think we've, oh, go ahead.
I'm just curious, in towns that have a public water supply, does the water commissioner enforce these, or in towns that are different from us because we have private water supplies? Do you know?
Usually it's the water commissioners are involved, and towns may do it differently, but by the time you have a municipal water supply system, you're usually having a water department and it's trained and certified staff, and it's a very different ballgame. Or you're hiring an outside firm that provides the trained staff to operate the water supply system.
What's the role of our water commissioner?
There isn't a big role, but it's just on the books as a requirement that we have water commissioners. So, but they've been doing a good job of just tracking certainly the downtown water supply issues. But I know in, over a decade ago, a couple decades ago, that there wasn't a lot for them to focus on in town. Other than things along the lines of Groundwater Protection Committee, what they're doing now.
Might be interesting to have them in all our free time present to us or something to see what they have to say.
Perfect. So if there's no further discussion on the DPH, again, if folks want a copy, feel free to reach out. Then it looks like we've got an 810 appointment for 58 Oldfield, which we've discussed on a couple of occasions. Mark, do you feel comfortable sort of catching us up to speed on this? Have you been in communication with the applicant?
In respect that it would be on tonight's agenda, I believe the applicant's here. And what they're trying to do is find a way to build an in-law suite and also reduce the bedrooms. So they provided these plans as the existing conditions. And the reason they're trying to do it this way is outside of this, a septic system upgrade would have to be considered. They basically are trying to limit it to a 5-bedroom septic system. And so you'll see the room count. Let me go to my plans here. That's what the board has reviewed prior, the existing floor plan. And they have a living room, the office, the dining room, the kitchen is 4, family room 5 on the first floor. Second floor is where they have the 5 bedrooms. They have the master and 4 other bedrooms. So there's 10, I'm sorry. And then the playroom in the basement. And the other part of the basement they're showing is unfinished. So they've created a new second floor plan right where it's blue there.
And so just to sort of pause here. So on the existing plans, we've got 5 rooms above the first floor, and we've got a total room count of 11, including the basement room.
Yes.
Perfect. Sorry to interrupt, Mark. Go ahead.
Well, that's okay. Now, the applicant has provided us a change to the second floor plan to show 2 bedrooms being turned into a bedroom B, which is below it, and a bathroom for bedroom B and a laundry room next to that. So that's their proposal.
Perfect.
So that would bring us down to 10 rooms.
10 rooms and 4 rooms on the second floor.
Yes, yeah, because they got 4. Yes, because of the basement room, that's correct.
Right.
So we're still at 10. And then I just want to go back to the existing just for a second for myself.
Sure.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, no, there's 5 rooms on the first floor.
Yeah.
So now the next plan shows the proposal, a garage, and then next to it's going to be an eat-in kitchen. And
it's sort of like a studio layout.
Yeah, pretty much a big room, They don't show where the sleeping area is, but I'm sure it's within the same area, probably down where the bathroom. I don't want to assume. If the owner's here, she could maybe explain where the sleeping quarters will be. She's here. If she's not, that's the proposal.
And so, go ahead, Daryl.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that borrowing any other information about sleeping quarters, since I believe that was, well, one, there's a full bathroom here. So yes. I would view this space as we've treated other studio spaces, is that it has 2 functions. It's not just a bedroom. So it's a kitchen and a bedroom. So
that is correct.
That adds 2 rooms.
So we're over with the basement room, we're over the room count, unless they deed record the basement room.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Perfect. And if they deed record the basement room, then we're at 5 bedrooms, 4 in the main house, 1 in the accessory unit, and essentially 11 rooms for the purposes of counting with the deed recorded basement room.
Correct. And I believe the basement room is below grade. I'd have to check just to make sure there's no walkout. That's one thing I didn't check, but
And there were kind of openings that I was curious about for the lower level, whether those are windows or.
I see what you mean at the playroom area, Daryl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so
Well,
many, it
sure.
doesn't seem like it would be doors, but maybe.
Yeah.
They look too small to be doors.
Yeah,
I mean, they also aren't indicated as doors. They're windows.
I see.
because we've got
Yeah, they're all
and
the
then-
It's kind of hard to see on the screen, but if I look at my own, I can see.
Yeah, little doors on the interior.
yeah. So Mark, can we also just confirm with the applicant that the bathroom adjacent to the playroom is just a half bath?
Yes, I can do that. That's great. I'd be glad to.
But otherwise it looks to be compliant to me with the deed recording, the bathroom confirmation, and the subgrade nature of the playroom. Does that sound right to others?
Yes, and confirmation that that space called unfinished storage is actually unfinished, because that would be a lovely suite back there. Otherwise,
Would pitches work for that, Daryl, on that unfinished storage?
yeah, I think that would help,
Okay.
because it does have a door as well, you know, at the hall.
Yeah, and then
That you're talking about that bottom right area, Daryl.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the second floor.
Ah, perfect. Okay.
There, yep.
Yep. So just here to kind of confirm that, you know, this should really stay unfinished.
yeah, that could even be placed in the deed recording, that unfinished, but it's up to the board.
I think that would be a good idea, because otherwise anyone not understanding septic size limitations would view that as, why isn't this finished, perhaps, although it may not have windows.
And the half bath was the other point, right? Is that a half bath on the basement level?
Perfect. And so Mark, do you need a vote from us or guidance from us? What's kind of the...
I believe the guidance is there. If she disagrees with any of this, or the applicants, I should say, about the deed recordings, both for the second floor unfinished space in the basement room, and pictures for both the unfinished spaces designated and the half bath confirmed. If she has any issues with that, I would just ask that they come back to the board. But if they're agreeable, then they could probably move forward with their suite for the in-law.
And do they have to sequence it such that either the work is undertaken simultaneously with the modifications to the second floor?
Oh, that's a good point.
Or should that go first? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a very good. I believe the best way is for them to, they're going to probably say they have the carpenter there at the same time.
Right.
The building permit could state that they have to happen at the same time.
Oh, is the plan for the studio space, is that in a separate building? I wasn't sure if it was taking over half of the garage or.
Go ahead.
I think, let me go.
I think there was a third orange dot on one.
Yeah, there's another building there. I reviewed it, and
yeah, I thought I saw one, but at some point.
Where the barn's located.
Here we go.
Sorry, there it is. Okay. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I looked at that a while
Okay,
back.
so maybe it could also be controlled by when the occupancy permit for that is issued, is another possibility.
Yeah, that could be the condition on the building permit from us.
That the other space has to have been reduced by one.
As long as Chris has got a comfortable, Chris Canny, our building commissioner, as long as he feels that he has enough control on that, I'm sure he does. You know, that if that's our request, I'm sure he'll make sure that's the condition for the final certificate of occupancy. And I'm not for sure if they've done a Title V inspection recently. I will have to check the files, but if not, they would need to make sure they have an active working system if this is more than 50% renovation.
It seems, oh, right, because the renovation would include the changes on the second floor as
Yeah.
well as the accessory
Yeah,
unit.
it may be very close, but that's a 36 by 42 plus the bedroom changes. It may not be over 50%, but if it isn't, I'm definitely going to recommend to them that they don't want to do all this work to find the system failing. That wouldn't be to the benefit of their cause here.
And maybe one other thing is confirming what, maybe we already said it, the walkout status of the basement.
Yeah, can check on that too.
Okay, looks
Perfect.
like they made the kinds of changes we said would make it more feasible, so that's good.
Perfect. Any other discussion by the board, or Mark, any other questions?
No, and I appreciate you reviewing this. This is a very complicated building request, and it's been with the board so long. That's why it was brought back to the board.
Sounds good. Perfect. So I think we've kind of going back to our agenda. We've got an 8:30 presentation by Brian Moore requesting water courses. And so what I would suggest we do is we've got the 53 Farm Road revision to a previously approved plan. Desheng and Bob, if it's all right with you, what I propose is that we start our initial discussion of that plan and then plan to interrupt that at the 8:30. Otherwise, we can collectively enjoy 10 minutes of awkward silence and do the 8:30 and then discuss 53 Farm after. What's your preference?
I think we went through the revisions with Mark just in the past today, yesterday, in a very detailed process. I think we addressed all concern or Mark's comments. So I think I can let Mark to speak out. If there's any questions, I can address it.
Perfect. So I think we can at least open that discussion in the 10 minutes we have. And so just to keep the meeting moving, I'd favor doing that. So Mark, I'm just gonna pull up, I think, the most recent set of plans that Desheng provided today. And then I'll ask you to just kind of walk through some of the key points. Does that work okay for you?
That's fine, thank you.
Perfect. I'm gonna just stop sharing for a second. And let me just get that up. Sorry, give me just one more second, folks. I thought I had saved it properly, but I clearly did not. And Desheng, I think the setup plans from 333 are the setup plans we should be pulling up, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to just ask folks to bear with me for one more second.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. All right, are you guys able to see those plans?
Yes. Yeah, if they can be enlarged just a little bit, that would be great.
I am hopeful. How's that, Mark? Is that workable, or would you like another clip?
That's workable, as long as the board members can see it and everyone else viewing. But the board received a request for revisions to a previously approved plan, and the main intent on that plan was to change the lot. If the board remembers, the lot had that rectangular setup above the red lines there. Yep. And now that the lot, that whole section of the front of the lot has been turned over to 55 Farm Road, and the green lines are the new section to 53 Farm Road. And in doing so, the plans that I reviewed prior to these were not the same plans that the Board of Health approved back in November. So with that said, the engineer and I have been in correspondence since last week quite often, and he did upgrade the plan to show that because now the well is going to be, the driveway is not being moved, and that was discussed prior, but there was the note that, unless there were new plans being submitted as this one, that would be shown on an as-built, but now it's being shown to be in compliance with our regulations. The boulders are being added. There's a little footnote above where the arrow, there it is. Yep, they're going to put boulders there to protect the well. And actually, that's really necessary. If you see that driveway, if you're snow plowing or whatever, you could easily hit the well. But it's meeting regulation. On sheet 2 of 3, there were some lines that were not shown on, and even on this sheet, the wetland buffer, I think there were some omissions. And again, I'll let the engineer explain, but I think he said it was because they were doing it in CAD, and sometimes radiuses for showing protective zones disappear. I'll let Desheng answer to that. But he's rectified that as well. And he's added the required, it's not the same as the plan the board approved in respect to showing the page just right there. That's it. Showing the distances. You'll see a blue dotted line, and in previous plans, he had up to 200 feet shown. But there was always a definitive statement on the plan that there are no other wells on this plot plan as shown or within 200 feet. And that's in sheet 1, footnote 1 under new notes, if you want to go there first. Well, we can stay here. And if you look under the bottom of this right there,
yeah, additional notes there.
Under item number 1, based on their review and record review investigations, it does note there are no existing wells located within 200 feet of the proposed septic leaching field unless otherwise noted on the plan. And he does show the well for this property on the plan. And the radiuses provided on page 2 of 3 were a little different from the approved plan, but because he has this note on the plan, which was redundant because it was on the previous plan, it will suffice, even though the radius of the 200-foot distance from the septic system was removed.
Okay, perfect. One question I had is, my understanding is that the drainage that I'm sort of indicating here has since been essentially cut off or capped. I don't know what the best term is, but a question for Mark and Desheng is, when we'd originally discussed these plans, that was still connected. My understanding is that this is now disconnected. Is that so? First, do I understand the facts correctly? And second, is there any other language that should be added as an additional note or somewhere else to reflect that the status of that sort of means something different now than it did in October potentially?
So if any drainage swale, just you will see we graded around our leaching field according to the Title 5. It's allowed. So when that pipe is plugged, that's basically similar drainage swale as we graded around the side of our leaching field. So we never labeled that a different way. We always call it swale. So yeah.
But and then from a fact standpoint, the kind of, I'll call it a culvert as indicated here, that is currently been capped. I just don't know the details of what intervention has happened since we talked about this last. And so I just want to make sure I understand the facts of the property correctly. So my understanding is that a section that was connected is no longer connected. I just want to, that's correct.
The way it was explained to me is that it's been plugged.
Okay.
Filled with brick or cement or both.
Okay. So I think that we'll sort of, any other questions or comments from the board as it relates to this plan? We're not going to open it to public comment in this portion just because we're going to go to Brian in 2 minutes. And so I want to give the board a chance, and then we can resume after Brian's presentation.
Okay, so I have a question for Mark. So are all of the necessary elements here just spread across different sheets?
That is correct, yes. So the radii that I was talking about are sheet 2 of 3.
Okay, and so you had time today to review this. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
What happened was I reviewed the whole plan, and noticed, you know, the variations from the approved plan. And then Deshang did submit a plan this afternoon, and I had a chance to take the electronic plan that you just saw, open up the originally approved plan, and as well as my 3 notices on what was missing or what was changed, and noted that he did correct them. We did chat over the phone just an hour or so prior to the meeting, just to discuss an email he had sent within an hour of that time, just to make sure we're of the understanding that the 200-foot radius shown for no wells wasn't needed because it was redundant when he originally submitted the first plan that was approved back in October. So that was sufficient to cover not having that radius back on the plan.
And then I see a question for Rebecca, and then we'll close the discussion. Pass the baton for Mr. Moore for our 8:30 appointment. Rebecca, go ahead.
I just have a couple questions. The first
Sure.
one is, do we know anything about the history? I'm kind of, this might be directed towards our agent. Do we know anything about the history of why that original drainage pipe was placed? And is there any relationship to the water flow patterns, like on the surface versus below the surface? And will that effectively change the flow, or is that just a little simple change that actually doesn't alter the true passage of water, having to do with the water? Or maybe this will be in your talk, Mr. Moore. But
So
anyway, I'm just curious about that, if we know any history. And the second one was the question of what the relationship is between the surface. I'm assuming it had something to do with the road, but whether we have that information, I suppose it's probably more in the purview of the Conservation Commission, but I'm just curious.
So Rebecca, if it's all right with you, what I propose is that we sort of put a pin in that question, let Mr. Moore do his presentation at the allotted time, and then we can revisit afterwards. Does that work okay for you?
Absolutely. I just thought of it.
Perfect.
They said it was plugged, so I was just curious.
Perfect. Brian, are you able to share, to go through your presentation, or how do you want to do that in terms of visualizing it?
I was told I would have about 20 minutes to get through my presentation, and I've prepared, I think, as best that I can for it. And I've shared my information with the board ahead of time, including a PowerPoint presentation, and I'd be...
I guess my question is, I'm happy to run the slides and you just tell me when to advance, or you're welcome to share the screen to go through the deck as you prefer.
Oh, no, why don't you, if you don't mind running the slides, Matt, that would be wonderful.
I am happy to do that. Give me just 1 second to get them pulled up. And then I am happy to do it, and just tell me when to click. And so I'm going to open the water course on 5365 Farm Road PowerPoint. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you very much.
All right, give me just 1 second. Perfect. And so my request for kind of all is that Mr. Moore is going to get a chance to discuss his material. I'm going to ask both the board and members of the public to hold all questions till the end. Mr. Moore will kind of get his time uninterrupted. We'll then have a period for the board to ask any questions that they have, or clarifications or discussion. Then we'll open it up to any public comment or discussion. Does that sound okay to the board? Perfect. All right. And I'm moderately confident I'm displaying properly. Brian, can you confirm I've got this up in a way that's visible to you?
Yeah, it's a little small, but I think it'll do. Maybe we can fiddle with their settings. I don't know.
All right, go ahead and walk us through it. I'm ready to click when you tell me.
All right, well, first of all, Brian Moore, 49 Farm Road. I wanted to actually open my comments with a giant kudos and thank you to all the volunteers who work on these boards in the current activities with what's going on in town. I know it's a thankless job, having served on many myself, and I wanted to say thank you for helping us, the residents of Sherburne, with these types of issues and being willing to entertain us when we have concerns that we want to raise. So the first question is the term water course. I hope you all read my letter. I tried to keep it brief and to the point. If you noted in the letter, it clearly states there is no definition of the term watercourse, single word, in the town wetlands regulations, nor is there a definition provided in the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act, the Massachusetts Rivers Protection Act, or the Federal Clean Water Act. And my understanding is that these regulations were written by the town, and they were written by the town board and approved by the town members as protective measures for public health. And so the use of the term watercourse in the town board of health regulations, I believe, was intended to address what the board members at that time felt was a gap in one or more of the state regulations, wetlands, WPA, Rivers Protection Act, Clean Water Act. And as such, it's not an ephemeral stream. It's not a surface water. It is its own entity. And as a practicing geologist, I believe that these watercourses exist in Sherburne and should be subject to protection as contemplated in your regulations. And so now we're going to get into the definition of what a watercourse is. Also in my letter, you'll see I mused a little bit. I looked up a bunch of different definitions in both, Merriam-Webster on the internet, and I provided various definitions in my letter. And if you review them all, you'll see there's a missing common theme. Watercourse itself, as a single word, really speaks to not only water, groundwater and surface water, but also to its habitat, to where it is, to how it travels. And as we know from models, just because you don't have water there doesn't mean water doesn't periodically get through there. And I am looking at watercourse as being basically that portion of the subsurface or surface where water periodically travels with some regularity. Now, if you notice, I included a PowerPoint slide, and if you want to advance the slides for me, that'd be great, Dr. Vitale, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. So the first slide here talks about the surficial geology in Sherburne. And our geology is dominated by glacial till, which is a thin ice contact deposit associated with low permeability and saturated thickness. Basically, it's telling you that our saturated thickness, the portion of the overburn that contains water, is not Cape Cod. It is not a giant lacustrine deposit. It is a very thin and not really well suited to producing water for public consumption. So it's already in danger because it doesn't really possess the natural characteristics of something like Long Island Cape Cod, which is an outwash deposit. It's a different ice contact deposit. So that's an important distinction. And if you look here on the map, it says the location of the 5365 Farm Road property and project is situated on the western side of the groundwater divide that's provided. Now, if you advance to the next slide, you'll see that I spoke here about what I just said. And in these types of deposits, groundwater can be perched, it can be trapped, but it typically interacts directly with surface waters. As a matter of fact, throughout much of New England, including our town, much of the surface water you see is simply an expression of what's going on with groundwater. So if you'd like to advance the slide one more time, please. Here's the sub-drainage divide that was drawn up between Mount Misery and Pine Hill. Basically, to keep it simple, a raindrop lands on the western side, it flows down into Sewell Brook. If it lands on the eastern side of that divide, it flows down into Farm Pond. That's what that divide really shows. It signifies a divide between the two drainage basins. Please note that the pond at 5365 is on the western Sewell Brook side of that drainage divide. Please advance the slides. This is a surficial geology map that shows the bedrock outcrops in the area. And the red hatching and the red dots are basically where bedrock is so close to the surface that it's peeking through.
Sorry, Brian, I got fouled up for a second. That's okay,
backwards.
Am I going the right way?
You're going forward, back. Stop. One more. Perfect.
Perfect. Sorry about that, Brian.
That's okay. I'm equally as clumsy with the controls, so that wasn't me. But we call this ledge. You see it all over town. There's a bunch of ledge up there. The ledge in my backyard, which is depicted on this map also, is actually the ridge of the Boston volcano from eons ago. And this deposit that we lie in has basically been worked and reworked by glaciers. It's not some kind of outwash deposit. And this is just further demonstrating with the little blue line, you see that basically groundwaters and surface waters on the western side of that divide basically flow to the west towards Sewell Brook. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
I'm trying to keep in my time. Okay.
There we go.
All right. Now, bedrock is one of the controlling features for the saturated overburden. All three of those blue arrows basically are pointing towards the little valley that exists right along the northern side of Farm Road. So you imagine these raindrops fall, they accumulate, they get into the ground, and they flow along the surface of bedrock or through this deposit in the direction of lower elevations. Next slide, please. In this case, that may or may not manifest itself at surface water at any given point in time. Now, for those of you who conducted the site walk the other day, you probably saw the pond was extremely low because we're coming out of a drought, or we're in a drought right now. At other times of the year, that pond is extremely high. I have personally witnessed on no less than 5 occasions that pond being as high, if not higher, than the gravel driveway that went back to what was Jane Elias's barn. So that gives you a concept of what happens with the groundwater in a deposit that's like a till deposit, where what we would call this the phreatic zone, what is saturated. And then we have this other little zone above it that we call the smear zone. And that is basically how groundwater changes elevations throughout any given year. And in a till deposit, those elevation changes can be 5, 10, 15 feet. In a sandy deposit, they're usually much less. They're usually inches or feet. But in till deposits, those can be orders of magnitude higher. And that's a very important distinction, because unless you're standing in the middle of that swale when it rains and rains and rains for like the summer we had 4 years ago, you know, then it's wet. But when you're sitting here in the middle of a drought, you look over and the pond's almost dry. So there's quite a bit of fluctuation within the saturated zone itself. Please advance to the next slide. So the pond that you see over at Farm 53 to 65 Farm Road is at an elevation typically in the neighborhood of 214 feet above mean sea level, give or take, you know, a couple inches, couple feet. There's basically a micro valley between Pine Hill on the north, and on the south side, you have Misery Mountain or Misery Hill. And in the middle is like a channel, if you think of it as a funnel. And this pond is basically just a rest stop for precipitation groundwater as it flows to the west towards Sewell Brook. This micro valley, the surface elevations of the micro valley right along Farm Road are between about 195 and 205 feet. And the difference in head potential, meaning if you can imagine a tube of water that's open at either end, and you plug it with your thumbs, and then you tilt it like this, so one up is up and the other end's down, and then you take your thumbs off, everyone knows what happens. Water flows out of the tube. This is essentially what is happening in this micro valley. You have the pond up here and other features down here, such as drainage swales, wetlands, people's wells, the bedrock, Sewell Brook, and the water is working its way down through the deposit over days and weeks and months, and then into these features, and it fuels them. It's like a battery that retains all of the water for this little area. And the difference in that head potential is what drives the water. And you've all been to the bottom of a swimming pool and you felt your ears pop, you know, and that's only 8 feet of water. We're talking, you know, 10, 15, 20 feet of water, maybe 30 feet by the time you get to Sewell Brook. That's a huge driver. Please advance to the next slide. So you have this micro valley, which exists right along the front of 53 to 65 Farm Road. You've seen it, you've been there. There's drainage features that were installed for it, and they've been there for decades. And this little pinch point basically is the funnel for all the surface water within the red lines, as you can see depicted on the little picture. And I called it a pinch point to try to emphasize the fact that there's a very narrow little area which is of hydrogeologic significance. Please go to the next slide. So as it goes through this little area, it might daylight, it might not, but it basically is focused right along that line. Now, if you would advance to the next slide, this is how it goes. Basically, the straight lines are the hand dug or man-made ditch that exists along the western property line, or excuse me, our eastern property line. And that surface water, when there's enough of it, flows right down to Sewell Brook and goes into the zone 2 that's delineated for the public water supplies, which are downtown. In addition to those wells, I can't tell you how many private wells, but if you look at every black dot on that little image, there's a private well there. Those people are drinking that water. Many of us drink it with simple particulate filters and are very happy about the quality of our water. Please advance to the next slide. So the Department of Environmental Protection has done the Board of Health an incredible service. They have mapped this water course as a wetlands hydrogeologic connection. It has been mapped this way for decades. It is a significant enough feature that the Mass DEP went out of their way to map it as such. So it's not as if trying to come up with the term and the definition of a water course that we're trying to create something out of thin air. I mean, as a practicing practitioner, I can tell you, and as a person who works with regulations and has volunteered on these boards, you want to be able to point the board towards something concrete, either in the regulation or in a paper or a scientific study or something which clearly defines and gives you some good feeling that you're making the right decision. This is why we hire people to go flag wetlands. And this is why we hire scientists to do, loading calculations for nitrates in water. And this is why we hire them to do mounding modeling whenever you have like a bunch of septics going into a site. And the DEP is mapped this for you already on a plan. They're saying this is a wetlands hydrogeologic connection. And in my book, as a practitioner, I see water course equals wetlands hydrogeologic connection. Next slide, please. I also see that this was a significant enough feature that the United States Geological Survey, now I'm a practicing geologist. I have some chops. I think I'm a good practitioner, but this is the USGS. This isn't Brian Moore's little diagram. This is straight out of Stream Stats. This is a significant enough feature that the United States Geological Survey has said, we need to keep track of this. We need to recognize it's part of the watershed. And whenever anyone permits anything in this watershed and does calculations, this area is added into their calculations and accounted for. Next slide, please. So now you have the Mass DEP and the Mass the USGS, both providing the Board of Health with a very simple and easy way to determine what is a water course. I'm not asking for us to define it out of thin air. I'm saying, why don't we just take the lowest common denominator? For something to be considered a water course, why don't we just say that Massachusetts DEP and USGS should agree that it's something that should be considered a hydrogeologic connection? That seems very simple to me, and I'm not creating it, and we're not hiring consultants to create it. We're just using the powers that be. It's a reasonable, defendable position to take. I'm not saying that the water course is over here or over there or down by over there just because I don't like the construction. This is a map feature. There it is. There is the hydrogeologic connection. It is the water course. It's the water course that we have been screaming about since day one on these projects. And as the neighbor, I can tell you, and as a practitioner, your bylaws say there should be a 125-foot setback. There shall be. And the applicant in this case has said before this board many times, I will adhere to any and all regulations. Well, this is your regulation. And I am really, really rather upset, as is my wife, that we have spent tens of thousands of dollars on attorneys and consultants to simply point out that the regulation the Board of Health has had in effect for a very long time should be protecting this water course. Next slide, please. For your benefit, I also threw on here the image of the 40B that recently was filed. It looks like several of the proposed structures fall right in the middle of what this water course is. There's more than one septic along the water course. And I would like for this board, you know, if I have my druthers, I would like for this board to, number one, recognize that there is a water course on 53 and 65 Farm Road. And it basically exists between that pond and the culvert and the wetlands. If you walk out there, it's pretty obvious. It's a channel. It's there. It should be protected. It's mapped by everyone else but us as being significant enough to be incorporated into flood models and all these things. What's going to happen when this gets paved over or buried? It's just not going to be good. And I can tell you from being, if you want to advance to the next slide, please, the person who drinks the water out of the ground on this cross section, I took the liberty of basically mapping out why my concerns about the well at 53 should be raised in the first place. And it really presents what the water course is and how the water travels. And if you look here, it's pretty obvious that the water between the pond and the drainage, so at the very down gradient western edge of the 53 Farm Road properties is connected. It is a hydrogeologic connection. Nothing else I could ever see would ever match up so perfectly as to take what Mass DEP has already mapped and the United States Geological Survey has agreed and put into their computer models for everyone to use as being a hydrogeologic connection, which equals water course. So that basically concludes my presentation. Again, I'm sorry I got a little heated in the middle. We've been beating our heads against this door for a long time. I love this type of work. I live for this work. This is what I do every single day. I would be happy to give this presentation to anyone else, to any other boards. And both my wife and I really sincerely hope you hear our concerns and act appropriately in this matter. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Brian. And congratulations on being spot on despite my technical difficulties along the way.
I had my timer going.
You did well. So, you know, I'm happy to sort of open with comments unless somebody else on the board sort of has strong feelings about initial comments.
Go ahead. I'll follow.
Perfect. You know, so first I would say, you know, Brian, it's clear that you have put a lot of time and thought and energy into thinking about this issue and into working hard to educate both the board and the community, and I really appreciate that. I think for me, and so my position on the board is, I think one of the things that comes up a lot is the importance of the board practicing consistently. And I think that the concern I have is that in terms of at least my 5+ years on the board, it hasn't been to the Board of Health to sort of say, you know, Concom has not identified this as a water course or a wetland, and we're going to use a set of definitions that will. And so I struggle, and I think ultimately found that I'm not comfortable saying we're using mapping features or other features that are not how we've handled other projects, other properties that have come into town. And those certainly may be valid considerations, as there often are, about things that we can do differently and perhaps do better. But I, at least again for myself, this is not the pattern I've seen in terms of the process of review or the basis for a water course. And so as such, I think that we really have to be consistent with how we've behaved and how we've handled other projects and treatments. And there certainly may be room for regulatory change. My personal opinion is that if that were to happen, it would be most appropriate within Concom as sort of having a variety of topics and areas as it relates to the delineation and that step in the process. Mm-hmm. But again, I think, you know, at least for myself, that's sort of where not to dismiss the importance of any of your point of view. And I'm just going to ask, it looks like we've got 4 or 5 people who are off mute, and I'm hearing at least some background muttering. So if folks can go on mute, if you're not sort of having the floor currently, that would be great. So that's a part that sticks with me, is it's not to dismiss the importance of what Brian says, but that as a board, we need to be consistent with our past practice. And I don't recall an instance where we identified a water course where it was not identified by others. And so with that, I'll sort of pass the baton to Daryl.
Okay, so back in November, I believe, of last year, we did, the board did research on water courses, their definitions. Ephemeral water course is really what fit this situation the best. We spoke with Mass DEP about how they regarded these sorts of features vis-a-vis septic. They did not have concerns. They deferred to Conservation Commission kinds of determinations. So that's what we were operating off of. And it wasn't clear whether open drain applied at that time. But then sometime later, and I meant to look up the dates, but we received information in this calendar year on 1977 documents, I believe they were, for some dynamics that were taking place over in this area, and the need for the town to put in that drain that has since been plugged up. We've also been advised by town council to not speculate on what would happen. And so even though members of the board, both volunteers and staff, saw flow in that open drain, I believe it was during the winter. Yes, it was definitely in the winter. There was snow. But with the plugging of the drain, that changes it. Now we don't have specific information relating to that dynamic. While we can speculate, and I think the information you've presented might speak to, will the water find another path? And whatever the dynamics were that prompted the letter writing and the actions taken circa 1977 to take place, are they going to reoccur? But we don't know that right now. And we're not meant to be a speculative board. And then the question could become, how would we verify that? And as Matt pointed out, the board just hasn't had this issue come up in a very long time. Whoever added that to the regs might have had some instance that prompted them to do so. But unfortunately, that institutional memory is not present any longer. So it's a difficult situation. I prefer a precautionary approach, but I'm not sure how to deal with that on a regulatory level. And I'd be happy to consider it more, but I don't really know which way to go with that.
I'm sorry.
Brian, I'm going to ask you to just hold off, because sort of as we outlined, we're going to have the discussion with the board, then we'll open it to public comment. Yours is the first hand in public comment, and so you'll be the first to be given the floor. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Perfect. And then I see Tom Trainer up, so he'll be next in the public comment queue. Matt or Rebecca, do you have any comment you'd like to add or make before we open it up? I see Matt coming off mute.
Yeah, just a couple things. I think administratively, I think I also have some, I agree completely with what sort of Matt and Gerald both said here, and I'm sort of the same position. I think in addition, the big thing for me is that we considered this issue previously. We discussed it with Mass DEP. We sort of made a decision. I'm not sure the fact that a plan's coming back now because of an unrelated change is a sufficient reason for me to want to set a precedent that we will then go back on a decision we made well beyond the typical period. And so I think there's not enough here for me to sort of take action on the particular plan that's in front of us. I can't comment on sort of any future plans that may come that may be impacted, but I think given that we sort of addressed this in the past, we asked the question, we got answers from Mass DEP, we made a determination. I feel uncomfortable sort of dragging this out forever in terms of it constantly being at risk for us changing our mind.
Then Rebecca, do you want to close this out for the board, and then we'll go to the public comment portion?
I just think that it's really interesting that we use We use scientific guidelines, which are essentially everything's effectively speculative. We don't have, there's nothing that's factual that we have to rely on. That's why we use our clinical judgment in medicine, and that's why scientists interpret data. It's all speculative in the end. I mean, you can't prove anything until the person's dead, or until the whatever falls over, on Farm Road, or not Maple Street. There was an unbuildable lot, and then the perk rate was changed, and then the first lot went in, and somebody's well was contaminated, and a homeowner in Sherburne who spent $27,000 out of pocket was exposed to neurotoxic levels of manganese. She could have Parkinson's 10 years from now. I don't know. I kind of think it's really interesting that our board and that our town council would advise that we're speculating. I mean, we have no other way to assess data as a scientist. Everything is speculative.
And I think I'm going to take the chair's privilege and just respond to one part of that, and then I promise I'll pass over to you. So I think, Rebecca, the discussion on Maple is a wonderful example, because I think it does speak to the fact that there was a circumstance, there was not an applicable regulation, there was an action taken in the context of that experience to address that regulatory gap. And so, again, I don't say any of this to minimize what Mr. Moore is saying or raising, but just to say, at least for me personally, my point of view, I don't think this is a place where acting on this in this fashion would be consistent with the past practice of the board, though a reasonable person could certainly disagree with me. So I'm going to sort of pass off to Brian. And Brian, I'd like to ask one question. You're welcome to make your comment, but at the end of it, I'm hoping you can address the question, which is, have you had any of the water course discussions with Concom or that presentation with that group?
So first I'll answer that question. Have I had the water course discussion with them? No, I have not, because the term water course does not appear in the regulations. And I was aware that, and I've heard before in public session, that the chair of BOH at the time had contacted Mass DEP, and that's my answer. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thanks so much, Brian. Sorry to kind of interrupt.
No, this is a perfect segue for me, because things have changed. And I'd like to point out this point, that at the annual town meeting, which was attended by probably everyone who's on the call tonight, you might recall that the town declared, I believe, that we were in a state of climate emergency. I believe that the town or the select board or the town as a whole made a resolution that we were in an environmental emergency. And you don't need to look much farther than the newspaper every single day to see that there are people who don't have drinking water. And some of them are in our own country. Now, the fact that we have this unbelievably luxurious resource at our fingertips, I think that we should take up the charge and continue to lead in protecting this resource. It's not just saying the water's still there in the ground. It's protecting the environment of the water, its habitat, the place it lives, the way that nature cleans it before it comes out of your tap with no PFAS or very low PFAS levels in it. That's all Mother Nature. That's not granular activated carbon or UV. It's Mother Nature, and she does a great job. And I, for one, in a climate emergency, want to continue to support Mother Nature's efforts. And it's not a Concom issue because it's not in their regs, and it's not a wetlands protection issue because it's not in their regs. Mass DEP, nowhere in their regulations do they say water course. It's not in the Rivers Protection Act, and it's not in the Clean Water Act. It is in the Sherburne Board of Health regulations. I'm simply asking, in this climate emergency, when everyone's water's at risk every day from new chemicals, that we consider the implications of having a regulation that could prevent people from being exposed to things that are not good for them, why we are not enforcing it. And in a climate emergency, maybe it's time for us to be a little inconsistent with the way we've done business and to be a little more protective. And thank you for hearing my comments.
Thanks so much, Brian. Daryl, is it okay if I go to Tom first and then to you?
Yes, I was hoping you would do so.
Perfect. Tom, you've got the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to bring up a point that I will unfortunately complicate things for you as a board, and I totally understand your approach, Matt. Certainly looking at your past practices and, of course, the regulations that you're designed to adhere to. But I wanted to bring up also climate change, for the following reason. The storms that we know we're going to see in 30 or 40 years from now are going to be much larger. I've gotten a chance to learn tools like the stream stats Brian just showed. As being a member of the town's Energy and Sustainability Committee, we've been connected to a 15 community grant through the state MVP program on a Charles River flood modeling exercise. And I've learned that the state in their flood modeling guidelines has been using I'll take one scenario as an example, for a quite large 24-hour event, a 100-year 24-hour event. They had been using 8 inches of precipitation. They just changed it to 10 inches. And that with future, that could increase. So things that Brian is showing are based on historical, stream stats and the DEP wetlands lines. That's all based on historical data. FEMA flood models are based on historical models. For a lot of these practical things about protecting wells, protecting septics, you're gonna need to start building in buffers. And we're doing that with this flood modeling exercise for the whole watershed. So I just wanted to point that out, and I think this is a very serious concern that these abutters have with that water course. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. Daryl, I'll pass the floor on to you.
Okay, so at issue, the issue for the open drain, as best I could tell from the research I did and talking to folks and what have you, again, last year, is that if there was flow from the septic system to that drain, that it could mix periodically with the intermittent flows that might be in the open drain. And because it was at the surface, kids, pets, adults might come in contact with the water, not realizing that it might have had some effluent and the contaminants therein present. So with the plugging of the drain that was feeding that more directly, what we don't know is whether there will be perhaps sheet flow off of the road, or whether the cross section that Brian showed from the pond that's farther down Farm Road from there might also reach that drain, or it might flow underground from there. It's not clear that there's definitely going to be water entering that drain. And so that for me is part of the question. And whether we could say things are going to be getting rainier, given the way most of Sherborn looks, with ledge and slope and wetlands and streams, I would find that incredibly complex. I'm not saying I don't want to tackle it. spent years working on trying to protect our water supplies. So that is definitely my interest, but I'm finding it hard to connect those dots for sure right now. And I think it would open up a lot of questions everywhere, and that's very complex. I am encouraged that by what Tom said, maybe there's some kind of modeling that the state's going to be using or something that we could apply so that we could do some forecasting on that. But I can't see doing this on a specific location now without, we saw the flows before. We had concrete information. It was new information. This is a new application before us. So we learned that. However, we also learned that the drain was plugged. But if the drain was not plugged, I would absolutely rule that the septic was within 125 feet of an open drain, would be my vote. But the conditions have changed. And I'm not sure how to answer that in the space of this evening.
Thanks so much, Daryl.
So I'm wrestling with it.
Thanks, Daryl. Any other comments or discussion by the board? Brian, I can't tell if that's a hand or a see you later.
I think I just wanted to make sure the record reflected that nowhere in my presentation about watercourse did we refer to the open surface drain that was plugged. We consider this completely to be independent. Now, as Daryl pointed out, it might have served to fuel that that watercourse. I agree with that. But I believe as a hydrogeologist, the main driver is exactly as shown in the presentation, which is the pond and the rainwater and the bedrock and the underlying materials. I just want to make sure that that was clear, that the removal of the drain has nothing to do with the removal of the water course. Thank you.
Brian, I think that was clear, and thank you for the added clarification as well. I think for us, as we've, at least speaking for myself, as we've thought about the project, I think open drain was one of the questions as it related to the historical dry well installation, the culvert under Farm Road, and the water course was another issue. And I think we've tried to thoughtfully approach both. Sort of before I close it out, I just want to offer any other points for public comment. And if there are no further public comment, then we'll go back to consideration of the plan.
This is Sally Tipton. I just want to say,
go ahead.
I just want to say I thought Brian's case was most alarming. I live downstream from all of this, and I feel that it should be considered most carefully that this go forward.
Thanks so much, Sally. I appreciate your comment. Any other public comment?
I do have a question for Mark. Sorry, Mark, put you on the spot. So would you be able to comment on excavations that took place more on closer to the pond, in between where we're talking about and the pond? And whether it's shallow depth, but I thought that's where other septics were going. So I assume there's some significant depth of soil there.
Yes, there's significant depth of soil. And we did dig down on the road that went to 65 Farm Road, or it still does, but the barn. I tested with the present engineer, Deschang, weighing on that part over the past 2 years. Previous to that, we were asked to do some soil test observations on the pond side. I believe the applicant was the previous owner of 65 Farm Road, and that testing was found to not be suitable for any new construction. That was, groundwater was, I can't remember, I'd have to look back, but I think anywhere from 3 to 4 feet. So it is, as you start to go on the west side of that driveway where Deschang had tested, it isn't as wet as what we found at the pond side.
Thanks, Mark. I see Rebecca's hand up. Daryl, does that answer your question? And can we pass off to Rebecca?
Yeah, go to Rebecca. I'm mulling it
Perfect.
over.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just going to say that at some point we're going to need to evaluate the water. Mr. Murchison did a really nice job on the tour of presenting his concepts, and I thought some of the ideas he had were really good. And but one thing that he hasn't had an opportunity to address is the drinking water. And as the Board of Health, we're going to need to obviously consider the interests of the future residents of this proposed development, especially if there's affordable housing, and if we're going to be if underrepresented populations are going to live in that affordable housing, then it's particularly important that we make sure that their drinking water will be safe. And so anyway, so I guess we'll have those conversations in the future.
Perfect. And I see Matt with a hand up.
I just want to clarify that what we're discussing right now is the impact of this on 53 and not on anything else, because I do think they're separate considerations. And so I just want to make sure we don't dive too far into a discussion of a proposed development that's not in front of us right now.
Perfect. Gerald, do you have any other follow-up you want to include? Or
yes, I have another question for Mark, if you remember. Are the soils permeable? Oh, that's the overburden soils.
They were permeable in respect to meeting our requirements. I don't believe I saw any perk test over like 20 minutes per inch. And that's on the whole area. But for 53 Farm Road, the soils were anywhere from a sandy loam to a loomy sand. It did vary depending on the depth. You'll see that on the septic plan if you want to go to sheet 203. Perk rates were, I believe, 8 and 11. So the soils were friable and permeable to get the perk, well, permeable in respect to the perk rates being 8 and 11. So didn't see anything that would indicate any percolation rate over a 40-minute per inch rate for the soil testing we did on that whole area. But I know we're sticking to 53, so you're welcome when the time comes to look at the soil logs on the plan itself. They're on sheet 203 on the right side.
Okay, so, and the reason I asked that question is if it was very shallow to ledge and a clear slope, it'd be more, it would be easier to envision that there would be breakout at the surface that might be channeled again in the open drain. But lacking the pipe that was feeding water to it, to me, that becomes less of a certainty given some of the other conditions. And unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of time to observe what the changes to that pipe might have made on the dynamics of the open drain.
Yeah, and Darryl, I know we're not discussing in general the other properties at this present time, but there was an observation by the engineer that when they're ready to share it, they can, but it would be related to, I believe, 55 Farm Road. There was a bunch of rocks, and according to the engineer, it was a well, but I don't know if it was a well. I never saw inside it because they didn't remove the rocks. They were just able to get a tape measure down for groundwater. They may even put a pipe in, I can't remember, but the interesting part is, are there any pipes going into that well? That I don't know. And again, we're not discussing that, I know, at this juncture, but that would be needed to be reviewed in future meetings.
So I think, Mark, I appreciate the response. I think, for me, one of the most important things is we need to be doing the same thing and discussing and considering this as other properties, and sort of looking at the subsurface geology is not a standard we've generally applied to say, this is how I believe a water course is functioning or other parts. So I think they're all important issues, and I don't mean to minimize either Brian or Tom's point, but I don't think the historical practice of the board supports us sort of invoking a water course in this fashion. If others disagree, certainly, when we get to the plan, vote your conscience and sort of your understanding of the facts and interpretation of the information. I think for me, it really is, these certainly may be important issues, and they may be important, particularly in the context of climate change or other extreme weather events. To me, it falls then into the rubric of similar to the experience with the manganese contamination on Maple. Like, you need to have the regulations to support it. And if it doesn't, you need to go through the arduous process to do that. I don't think we can do that from watercourse as it exists in our regulations, in part because I don't think that's a standard we've applied to every other property we've considered. And I think that we need to be consistent across properties. So I think the watercourse discussion is certainly one that can continue in the future. If there's no further public comment on it, I'd like to go to the 53 farm if there aren't any other board comments.
Oh,
fire away, Daryl.
Okay, I just have one more. What we do look at as a board is for a property that's being developed that the run on or run off should not change by more than 10%. So while this may not pertain to 53, it will pertain to anything else around it. And it's for this kind of issue. I mean, the most relevant other case that the board has had in the past is a property that was shedding water, and with the addition of an additional driveway onto that property, downslope onto a road where it was forming sheet flow across the road. And of course, in the winter, that was freezing and creating dangerous conditions. And so mitigation had to be done for that. So it might be a similar thing if it creates flow, creating this water course dynamic in the future. That would be an issue to me. Thank you.
All right, with that, I'm going to close the water course discussion. We'll transition back to the discussion of the 53 farm plans. So Mark, it sounds like from a data and review standpoint, you've been able to complete a review. The plans as provided, revised by Deshang this afternoon, satisfy the needs of the review, including the presence of the barrier for the well. I guess, is that an accurate summary just to kind of catch us back up to speed?
That is correct. That's an accurate summary.
And so for me, it sounds like the plan is in a position for us to vote on. I guess my one concern is that the well's been in place for about 5 months and there's no protection for it. So we've sort of transited a winter where the wells remained unprotected. So I'd like to understand more either from the engineer or for the applicant about when we can expect that to be remediated so the wellhead's protected appropriately.
We should implement it so in any time. So I guess was the applicant was moving forward doing the work, but I guess with some of the lot line change and the septic plan approval, that's not an excuse. I will. The applicant is here, but I think we should be able to get the protection up in the next week or so.
That would certainly be meaningful for me. Just again, I believe 55 is currently occupied, and so that transit's in use. So when I look at just how many times Amazon's hit the light post next to my driveway, I'd love to see that well protected ASAP.
We're taken.
And then Brian, I see your hand up. I'm just going to query the board for any other questions about the plan, and then I'll recognize you. Any other plan questions for members of the board?
I don't believe so.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Brian Moore, 49 Farm Road, obviously. My wife and I are obviously strongly opposed to this project. The 2 questions I'd like to make sure that I believe it's the responsibility for the applicant to address these is that, as Daryl noted earlier, there is a 10% change in runoff adjustment, and our concerns are that that whole driveway basically sheets down into the wetlands immediately upgrading of our property, and they're adding a house and a deck and more driveway, and they've also cut down just about every darn tree on the lot. and they're adding a retaining wall. And I haven't seen anything that says that they've really done any kind of significant calculations to determine whether it's going to change the amount of runoff by 10% or not. I do know that the applicant had noted, I think that it's good that they were observing best management practices with the stormwater, but without actually having run through all the calcs, I can't tell you if that was adequate or not. I just want to make sure the applicant is held to that standard when he comes back with the final application. I also believe that this project should be viewed as part of a phased project now that the board is aware of the applicant's intentions for the remaining parcels, where he's going to do a whole bunch of other construction. And I'd like for them to consider asking for, and the amount of engineering money that's been spent on this project, I don't think it's outrageous to ask the applicant to provide some kind of mass balance equation for nitrates and also to do a mounding calculation. These are very reasonable and easily conducted activities, but if they're not done, then what's going to happen is we're going to have basically raw sewage popping out of our yard. So I'd very much like the board to consider adding those requirements before they take this to a vote. It's really not very unreasonable given all of the studies that we've done to show that groundwater pops out in our yard from this lot. And right now as of the 40B application, I think there's, I don't know, a dozen or so septics planned for that hillside. It's a travesty, but if they're going to do it, I think they should be held to a reasonable standard of modeling the groundwater, which is like in terms of modeling how high it raised by the stuff that's being put in it, and modeling the nitrate loading that's going to occur at that. And if it's just a shame that, again, the Moores are going to have to foot the bill for this. I don't see why we can't ask the applicant to do it. He's probably already done it. So why not just ask him to present it to you guys before issuing a permit? Thank you for hearing my comments.
Thanks so much, Brian. Rebecca, go ahead.
I just think I agree with Mr. Moore that I think that it's important that we obtain this information in advance. The state has guided, obviously they don't regulate our water supplies. We have that responsibility. But at the state level, it's not allowed to not evaluate things that are clearly in stages as one big project. And I think that we need more information up front before we can make an informed decision that's going to be proactive and thoughtful and thorough.
Perfect. Matt, I see you coming off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, because we've discussed this many times, at the moment what we have before us is an application for a single family home. We don't have a mechanism at the moment in our regulations to lump this in with potential future development. As a result, we can't demand from this applicant something we wouldn't demand from anyone else putting in a single family home. I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but I'm saying that's the way our current regulations are. And I think that we need to look at that at some point in the future, but I think it's hard for us to say we can't lump this in with everything else. Doesn't mean we can't ask for those things when a larger project comes along. Doesn't mean we can't eventually change our regulations to address that. But at the moment, I think we can't ask anything of this applicant that we don't ask for a standard application for a single family home.
And I think that the DEP gave us advice, or MAHB, that we were supposed to be consistent with updated regulations at the state level.
I think
a couple years ago that was an amendment in the state guidance.
I think we're consistent with the regulations, and I think there's a very specific structure and process to consider the 40B that will also bring many of these topics up in an appropriate form and venue via both peer review and in comments to the state ultimately when more details become available. So, you know, I would echo Matt that I think before us we have an application for 53 Farm. It satisfies the setback requirements. That's, you know, that's what we have. Like, again, there may be gaps that it's identified that we want to think about. We've got lots of other things that we're thinking about. And I certainly appreciate Mr. Moore's appreciation of a volunteer board, but like, you know, there's only so many bites you can take at the apple. And I think we've tried to take seriously those pieces and to be thoughtful about it. I'm happy, Brian, to sort of have one more comment, and then we're going to close and go to vote on the plan, because this is, I think,
Mary and I hired an expert. I'm sorry.
I just like, this is the fourth time we've talked to, like, I think your points have been incredibly clear. And I think your position is not, I don't feel factually uninformed about the things that you have in mind or the concerns. And I don't mean to dismiss them, but I also don't want to keep going back and forth. So you're definitely welcome to make your comment. We'll then close and go to the vote on the plan.
I appreciate that. Thank you for allowing me this extra time. Mary and I hired an expert. We paid a tremendous amount of money to this expert who stood in front of this board and presented you with a model that showed that the nitrate loading from the septic system, that is essentially the same very plan, would not diminish to the regulatory level by the time it hit the property line. That is in your record, that is in our discussion and in the record. And for us to not ask the applicant to explain that away is irresponsible and short-sighted. It's in the record already that it fails at the property line. That is a fact. It's in your records. Why aren't we doing something about it? Thank you.
Brian, and just a follow-up question. In the regulations, where are you seeing a regulation that requires a single-family home to satisfy that standard?
I'm not sure that's the point. We provided
but
did the study and we provided the results.
But that's a point where if we don't have
the point. We have to. We can only act on what we have a regulation for, and that's not something we require.
And that's not true. We are a private water supply. We do not have to only do things we have a regulation for. We need to be strong and stand up for what's in the best interest of the town.
What we cannot do is just arbitrarily do things. We can't arbitrarily do things we don't have rules for, right? That is the issue. We can't just, because someone spent a lot of money, change the rules. And that's the difficulty we're in here.
That's not true. But that's why we are given the task of enforcing the good practices and a lot
enforcing the regulations that we have written.
That's what it's about with a private water supply. Somebody has to stand up for protecting the drinking water. And it's not obviously happening on this board.
So Rebecca, again, I'm just going to comment, as is often the case, I think.
Loading at the property line has been calculated by experts who know a lot more than I do and a lot more than any of us do. And they told us this before.
But I think we have to have a performance standard because if you may recall, we have not invoked what's the nitrate load on the property line. We haven't done it for other applicants. We haven't done it for Maple Street. We did not say what's the nitrate load that's here. What's the property line that's here? Here's our definition of water course. No, but literally, literally we had a new no variance application for Maple Street. And you didn't mention what's the nitrate load at the property line. And so if we're not mentioning it for Maple Street, the fact that Mr. Moore has retained an engineer to do that doesn't introduce a new regulatory requirement that we can apply to this property that doesn't apply to Maple Street. So I don't think that further discussion is going to be fruitful. I think we should proceed to vote on the plans.
Oh, and I'm going to ask if I can make one.
Sure, fire away.
To tie this together. So Rebecca, you are the one other board member who was with me through all of the 5 and 6 and 7, in some cases, hour meetings that we had for the fields at Sherborn, which at that time was the largest project that the town had seen. And we had those analyses, but that's because it was not a single family home on a single lot. And so that's where those requirements for the EHIR came into play. And that would happen again with a larger system. Should we do that for every property? That's a question, but that has to be in the regulation. I don't think we would be backed up on that. DEP does, I'm not done, DEP does not require that for Title V. And we go above and beyond Title V, but we have to have it written down so people know what they are working against. So if we want to pass it, and I'm so excited that there are a lot of people who are getting more interested in how we manage our drinking water resources in town. And that's marvelous. And I hope people continue to be involved with us as we go ahead with regulatory changes, and feel free to submit things in writing to us that we should be considering. That would be wonderful help to the board, who are also your fellow residents. So that's it. We do address that issue. We take it seriously, but there is a delineation on where it's invoked and where it's not.
Okay. With
May
that,
I
I'm gonna
please respond, please.
you can respond, and then we're going to close this discussion and go to motion as it relates to the revised plan.
The DEP says that it's a civil matter between two property owners. So what we're saying as the Board of Health is that we're unwilling to stand up for our abutter. We have those calculations from previous math that was done by an expert. So what you're saying is that we're forcing the abutter to sue, or we won't do anything in his interest. We're supposed to represent every person in Sherburne, not just one. We usually don't have the math, but we have the math now. So how can we lose our responsibility to protect his interest?
So with that, we're going to go to the plan. Do I have a motion to approve the revised plan as provided by Deshang and reviewed by Mark today?
So moved.
Second.
I think my only other piece is, and I think this is a question for Mark, is I really would like to see the wellhead protected within the next 2 weeks. I would like to be able to release the plan, but I would also be comfortable making it conditional to placement of the well protection given the extended period with which the well has been placed. Do you have any suggestions about how to best ensure that we have a way to get the wellhead protected?
You could make that as part of your approval for the well.
Okay.
It's a septic / well request here. And you could make that a condition that within 2 weeks, the well be protected with boulders or another method.
Okay.
Yes, I'm likewise concerned that, especially with potential increasing activity on that property, that the protection is important to get in place sooner than later.
And Deshang, does that sound realistic on your end, a 2 week turnaround?
I would think so. Bob, if you can, you can speak. If you can do it, just do it.
Okay, and then my other concern is just to be reassured from Mark, given that you received the revisions to the plan hours ago. Are you confident that you have been able to go through it sufficiently?
Yes, it was reviewed and thoroughly with the notice of the deficiencies, and those have been corrected.
Okay.
We will get the hard copies to you, Mark. You still need 5 sets, so we'll get you those 5 sets tomorrow morning.
Thanks so much, Deshang. Perfect. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Daryl, can you start us off with the voting?
Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, nay.
Matt Vitale, aye. Okay, and I think that was our final agenda item for the meeting.
Did we have, since apologies, I missed the beginning due to internet dying.
We assigned you the follow-up task for communication to select board with inputs for Rebecca. That's what happens when you come late, you get homework.
Okay.
And then depending on the timing, if we're able to include it in the discussion on the 6th, we'll do so, but otherwise we'll delegate to you with Rebecca providing any additional input.
Have we heard anything more about when they...
What you're asking? I'm sorry, Matt.
This is the follow-up from the 40B walkthrough that Daryl will prepare comments on behalf of the board for the select board. If the timing of any extension allows discussion on July 6th, we'll plan to do so. Otherwise, we'll plan to have you guys act on behalf of the board. And for the agenda items for July 6th, I think we've got extremely narrow agenda since we have the, that's a special meeting that's driven by the timing of variance hearings. So Ellen, we've got the 2 variance hearings. Do we have any other agenda topics? So a tentative hold for any comments for Farm Road if we need to bring those back to the board. Do we have anything else that is time sensitive that we need to incorporate within that special meeting?
So far, I think that's it, unless you want to talk about the 21, 23 South Main.
Let's see how that sort of plays out. We can tentatively add that depending on if we hear from the applicant.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the only agenda item. I guess my other one is if we can just include a brief update on the regulatory. We sort of have broken down into mini groups to work on some of the regulatory changes that we talked about, I think 3 meetings ago. And so maybe we can just plan for a very, very brief status update on those.
Yeah. Well, the only other thing I think we'll have that night is you'll need to approve another visiting nurse, their
Contract
invoice.
Okay, perfect. So let's include that as well. All right. With that, I think we're done for the evening. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, Daryl, aye.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Second Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Ciao, guys.